Okay? Now, what was critical to make this work? What was critical about the example? Because this is not always going to happen. Okay, so yes, that is one thing I relied a lot on in this example was that it turns out that it's a lot about, you might think, well, it really what matters is that the corn feed market's really big and the oil or ethanol part of it's very small. That's not really what's driving it. I use that only indirectly. And the way in which that was important was only that this demand curve was much more elastic than the other demand curve. What would have happened if these two demand curves had the same elasticity? What would happen? What would happen? What would happen is the corn subsidy would say, let's assume the corn subsidy shifted up that demand curve by $1. It would shift up the aggregate demand curve, not by a full dollar, right? Right? That is, if I add two demand curves together, this demand curve and that demand curve together, and I shift this one up by $1, the aggregate demand curve at the original equilibrium point isn't going to shift up by $1. Because in order to shift this curve up by $1, I would have to shift both these curves up by $1. Right? And indeed, if they have the same elasticity, then this curve will shift up only by their proportion accounted for by this market. So if these were equal sized, this vertical shift would be half of the shift over here. Okay? It would be half as big if they were equally elastic. Okay? So what's going to be important is the elasticity of these two curves. Because the fact that you have this other market is going to say, well, it's true I'm paying the subsidy on these units, but that's going to shift the aggregate demand curve a lot less. That's going to translate to a much smaller price impact. And so a $1 subsidy to ethanol, if ethanol was 10% of the market, is kind of like a 10-cent subsidy on everything. But when the elasticities are different, the farmers like a subsidy on which product? When you can sell in two markets, the farmers want to get their subsidy where? Why? Why? Think about it. Think about it. To understand the answer to that question, think about price discrimination. Right? Think about an equilibrium where I have a free market between the two uses of this product. Demand A, demand B. Two uses of a product. In a competitive market, competition will imply that the price is the same in both uses, right? That's what competition does for me. Holding output fixed, would the sellers like to redistribute output across these markets? Would the sellers prefer a different allocation than an equal price? The answer is, of course. They would like to move output from the market where demand is less elastic to the market where output is more elastic. But under competition, you can't do that. Because every farmer wants to sell in the market that has the highest price. Just like every fisherman wants to fish in the lake where you can catch the most fish. Competition is a bitch. It means they can't reallocate output without some help to where they as a group would like to send it. So when his friend comes in and says, hey, I can get you guys a subsidy, are they going to say, I want the same subsidy in both markets? Heck no. They're going to say, pay me the subsidy in the more elastic market. That'll allow us to charge a lower price in that market, which of course will allow us to charge a higher price in the other market. And as long as those elasticities aren't the same, we're going to prefer that to a small subsidy equal across the two markets. So we should see political pressure to in fact pay the subsidy the way we see it, which is to try to subsidize new uses of this product where demand is more elastic at the expense of uses where the demand is less elastic. An equal subsidy wouldn't be what maximizes the benefits to his friends. He's going to want to tilt the subsidy to do something like, oh, let's divert some of this oil, some of this corn to this ethanol market where the demand for usage is much more elastic. Okay? That's the basic idea. In this extreme example, where demand was perfectly elastic, that's where price discrimination is fantastic, because you get the most bang for your buck in that case. That's where we really want to divert output, because it doesn't depress price over here, but allows you to raise price over there. So it's really about these farmers who would like to price discriminate, right? Left on their own, they would like to price discriminate. Competition prevents them from price discriminating, but this differential subsidy allows them to do so indirectly. Yes?
But using this logic, wouldn't we sort of expect companies high-tech companies who receive a lot of subsidies also try to go to old markets, because it seems that mechanism to go extra money for them was to be on the old market.
Yeah, if you can collect the subsidy and sell in the old market, then you'll defeat this price discrimination scheme. But if the government can really say the subsidy, for example, gets paid to the ethanol producer who produces corn. He gets paid per gallon of ethanol produced, and that's how the subsidy was done. It wasn't per bushel of corn, it was per gallon of ethanol produced. He's going to get paid. Then unless them cows are willing to drink ethanol, okay, they're going to be staggering a lot, I think. I don't think that's good for them if they're going to drink a lot of ethanol. But unless they're willing to drink a lot of ethanol, they're going to not be able to arbitrage that side. Okay, so that's kind of the story that you would expect to see in that kind of a world. You would expect to see an unequal or differential subsidy tilted toward the market where the demand is more elastic, because that's in fact what's going to maximize the benefit to the farmers in this case. Okay, people see how that works? So the extreme case of perfectly elastic kind of makes it the easiest, but you really don't need perfectly elastic. Just more elastic in one market than the other says if you're going to give me a subsidy, rather than pay it across the board, pay it in a place that's more elastic, because that's going to give me some of the benefits of price discriminating against these markets. Now, you don't want that subsidy to get too big, because now once it's gotten big enough, I've gone beyond the optimal level of price discrimination. I'd like to discriminate a little less then at some point. But at least initially, you'd like to see the subsidy paid to you in this kind of a form. So it's not surprising that farmers could gain much more. And the fact is they're going to gain much more precisely when the demand for ethanol is much more elastic. The demand for corn for ethanol is much more elastic than the demand for corn for other uses. Yeah?
So how would you take something like this, to the real world? We didn't draw very complicated demand or supply, but still there are things we don't know what part of the curve we are. We don't know how much